Hey there, thanks for tuning into DuckBricks. I'm Chris and welcome to Bionicle Fanon Reviews, where I review every single Monday the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models. These are not official sets, but instead they have been canonized and built by fans for the official Bionicle Generation 1 storyline, either through official canonization contests like the Dark Hunter or Rahi contest all the way back in 2005, or the more recent TTV canonization contest currently being overseen by the current herald of Bionicle Generation 1 story, Greg Farshty. Now up for today's review we have the Proto Drake. So the Proto Drake was one of the winners of the Bionicle Rahi canonization contest and as such appeared in the Bionicle Rahi guidebook. However, beyond that, it hasn't really appeared too much in the story. All we really know about it outside of the facts that were included in the guidebook is that it is a Metru Nui Rahi that frequented the Ga-Metru sectors, which makes sense because it is a bluish kind of creature. This is an underwater creature, which does explain why it can't really stand up or can't really be posed all that well, which I can definitely forgive for this model because it's supposed to look like it is swimming underwater, and in fact the shot of it in action just shows it bursting up from the top of the waves in an action pose like so. So it's definitely not supposed to be a model that just stands up. It doesn't even have legs, it just has a tail for swimming and two arms for swimming as well. So a pretty simple model in terms of what it's supposed to be, but surprisingly complex in some places. Now to get into exactly how I do the criteria for these reviews, I typically review models on a 4-point system. Number 1, posability. So how well can I get this into cool and unique poses? Can it support the weight of its own limbs? Are things going to be falling off or is it relatively stable? Number 2 is building techniques. So does this just reuse different parts from different sets, or does it actually try to do something new with the pieces given? Number 3 is general aesthetics. So how well does this look just purely on an aesthetic level, just completely agnostic of the actual story? Does this look nice? Does this look like what it's supposed to be? And number 4 is how well does it make sense in universe? So if I were to see this, does this make sense as a Rahi in universe? And could this very realistically be seen alongside other Bionicle creatures and Rahi living in Metru Nui? Now that we've outlined all 4 points of how I plan to do these reviews, let's get into the actual review of the Proto Drake, one of the most interesting Bionicle Rahi. Alright, so let's start off with a 360-degree turnaround of the Proto Drake, where you can see all sorts of angles of its building techniques, and just take a look at the different types of build techniques used throughout this model. As you can see, it is a very unorthodox Rahi, being a water-based Rahi. There aren't any visible legs or visible standing point or even a place where I can really angle it to display as a pose. It basically just lays down flat and almost acts like a sea serpent or some sort of a sea creature. Moving all around, you can see some sorts of interesting building techniques used, like the Toa Nuvagali weapons for the flippers and so on, which actually do work out quite well. But speaking of these building techniques, let's just take a look at the model as a whole, removing it from the turnaround platform here. Alright, well let's just start off with the number 1 point, Posability. I'm going to try to angle this in the best view that I can. Obviously this is a very non-traditional model, so it doesn't pose in the normal ways that you would expect. The first thing that you'll notice is that obviously these flippers are mounted on ball joints, so you can angle them to a generally wide degree. Unfortunately, the way that they are mounted means that they're not actually fixed, and they're very prone to falling off, as you just saw right there. The reason for that is that because these pieces are just mounted on these single ball joints, and those are just connected by a single axle, which means that as you move it around, they are prone to fall off, and especially the way that you bend it can actually cause it to separate. I have used red Technic axles here to really exemplify this issue, but you'll notice that if I try to bend this forwards or backwards, or let's see, on this one, I bend it forwards a little bit, it can start to move out of the Technic axle here. If you notice, you can't actually bend it forwards like this forwards or backwards without actually causing it to start to remove from the axle, which is pretty unfortunate. A lot of other fan-created models have this problem, and honestly, I probably would have preferred a slightly stronger joint there. Not to mention this joint being weak, but it actually isn't attached by any friction mostly, so you can really just wiggle these around. Moving on to the rest of it here, Away from the flippers, you can see that the head has a pretty standard amount of articulation. It's just the Toa Nuva leg and a foot piece mounted on it. This is another use of a Rahi using the classic Toa Mata foot piece as a head, which again works out pretty well. That's some nice parts usages there. I guess it's a little bit of a more common technique than I thought, but I can definitely see this as some sort of a snout, and it does actually look distinct from the other creature that used it, which was the Archives mole. So it's definitely a good thing here, and I do like the use of this spike back here to add some detailing to the head and make it seem like it has some sort of a crest, like a more regal looking creature. Moving along here, while it may seem that you can articulate things the flippers like so, you can't really articulate it that much. This Toa Nuva leg piece doesn't really do anything other than act as a structural support, and there you just saw how easy it is for these pieces to fall out, so that is a little bit unfortunate. Moving over to the back here, you can see that you can angle this and actually have it move as some sort of a flipper, which I think works pretty well. This actually looks very aquatic, it looks very organic, and I can definitely see this as realistically being part of a sea creature swimming along. Not only can you move this larger section, but you can also move this smaller section, and there's some parts usages of the Kodan ball or the Pohatu Nuva climbing claws here stacked together, which actually does evoke this kind of plus shape of the Technic structure here used as fins. Sure, is this a little bit rudimentary? Maybe, but honestly I think it's pretty good and pretty sophisticated for especially the Mox time. I think that using these Technic curved pieces in this sort of plus manner to evoke some sort of unique fins, and then following that up with another set of 4 protrusions on the back tail really make this feel pretty consistent, as well as actually tying it back to some of Bionicle Rahi roots, with having this Technic aspect being a pretty big part of the aesthetics of the design, because of course the original Rahi were very Technic focused. Moving along to the underside here, the way that it's constructed, oh, there goes one of the flippers again, quite annoying how it does that, but the way that it's constructed is literally just a Toa Mata body and then 2 Borak rib cages arced around it, and then they have this Rakshi staff piece presumably to act as some sort of another fin to help it glide underwater. I don't particularly mind this because it makes sense in an underwater context, but I will have to note that because it's placed so awkwardly on the bottom, you can either try to have it tilted up in some manner, or just kind of have it collapse downwards, and it actually almost forces the model to rotate downwards just because of the way it's oriented. So this one is honestly a really hard one to have on your shelf because of just this piece is pretty unwieldy, and you can imagine that if it was removed, you could maybe get it to look like it's gliding upwards like this. Actually, this looks pretty good as is. Without that piece included, I really like how it actually looks like it's curving upwards from the water, but this pose right here is pretty much impossible to do when I put the piece back on, because as you can see, that piece just automatically causes it to fall over or to fall downwards and so on. So not one of my favorite parts of the model. I think that it could easily have done without it, although underwater it definitely looks realistic. Moving onwards to the actual construction of the flippers and onto building techniques for them, these flippers, completely agnostic of the fact that they keep falling off, are actually built pretty well, and I do say that because I love the usage of this webbing piece, which was originally introduced for the Galak Borak, the water-themed Borak, fits in perfectly with this model actually acting as some sort of webbing on this flipper, and makes what would otherwise be a pretty rough Technic beam just actually look a lot more organic and seem like it flows continuously onto the edge of the flippers. In fact, these flippers, besides the fact they keep falling out, are one of my favorite parts about this model, because I really love the very unique shaping and how they've actually oriented some pieces in unique ways to give it such a solid feel. The use of the Toa Nuva leg here to curve it around really tries to complete the look and does so pretty well, and even if you look at it from the underside, it still looks pretty armored up and pretty complete because of the way this Galak webbing piece curves downwards and fills up the underside as well. All in all, this is the most completed and most fun aspect of the model to build for me because of just how unique it is. No other model in Bionicle really does anything like this, and unlike some of the more standard connections, like obviously the head is pretty basic and standard, the way the neck constricts, as well as the tail, even some parts on how it's connected are literally just ball joints. These flippers are actually quite unique, and I only wish they were attached with a bit of a stronger mechanism, because if so, that would have made it a lot better.
even moving on to the way that the Gali Nuva flippers are attached, they've taken advantage of all possible connection points of the piece. You can see that actually when we move along this flipper here, they have it connected on this plus Technic axle here. They have a Technic pin adhered to this kind of circular aspect here, and they also have a Technic axle running through the cross section of the axe, which essentially makes it such that it's very firmly locked in and also serves as a cornerstone piece holding all these other pieces together. And for a piece that was intended as pretty much just a weapon and some sort of a propeller mechanism for Gali, this looks really good and almost looks like it was made for this creature, just how well it works. So that's done really well. You can also get this into pretty fun poses, imagining it gliding underwater, like having the limbs tucked backwards here, gives it a pretty different look, as well as having it, of course, when you dive up from emerging from the water, you can have this fully splayed out like so, kind of like it has in the artwork, and really show off how majestic this creature is, almost like a mythical creature emerging from the depths of the ocean. So I love the shaping here, and I guess that kind of brings us over to the third point, which is aesthetics. So completely ignoring the fact that some stuff can tend to fall off, I'd say aesthetics are pretty good on this model. And I say that because if you look at the shaping, it very much sells the concept of some sort of an underwater serpent. You've got a tail with some fins sticking out in all directions, a very organic looking set of arm blades here or flippers, and the head, which again, the parts usage of using the very curved and organic, streamlined looking Toa Nuva legs does a lot to really make this model stand out and make it look like it's really diving deep underwater. That's what I really do like about this model in particular. Even as we move on, the tail, I know some people might not like this because of the overuse of Technic, but honestly, to me, as I mentioned before, this not only evokes the original Rahi, but also gives it a very unique type of shape, because I don't often see Bionicles or Bionicle Rahi having these fins in this sort of plus configuration, and the fact that it's topped off by the inclusion of these 4 blades here to actually have it mirror these flippers here makes it seem visually consistent. In fact, the thing that stands out the most to me is this very strange inclusion of the Rakshi blade there, which again, I still don't know why that was there, because all it does is hamper Poseability, and honestly, since there is no matching fin on the top, or nothing really interesting was done with this, they literally just took the standard handpiece and stuck it in, that's not something that's really too special to me, and I feel like it really could have done with something either a little bit more interesting on the underside, like maybe a set of flippers going down, a set of flippers going up, like a fin almost, or just not including it at all, because I feel like it actually just doesn't really add too much to the model itself. The other thing that doesn't add too much is this inexplicable Technic beam here. I guess this is supposed to evoke a flipper along the side, but I'm a lot less sold on how this looks compared to this. I feel like this is almost supposed to be the builder almost thinking that maybe they wanted to put another fin up there, but maybe just decided not to. But just saying, imagine if this piece was there instead. I feel like that honestly works out a lot better and almost acts like a shark fin as compared to the very odd placement on the bottom. I might even leave it like this if it's on my shelf, because I do actually kind of like the look of this fin arcing upwards a lot better. But leaving this piece off and putting it back where it should be, this Technic connector piece here just doesn't make too much sense to me. I don't know why they couldn't have just used a standard pin, although the only reason that I can think of is that they were trying to make it evoke this kind of style of, you've got a spike here, maybe this is supposed to be kind of a spike, but I'm not really that sold on that. The only other thing of note are the claws here, which I think are done pretty good. They are attached as part of the flippers here, and if you look at it from the silhouette view, the claws do look pretty realistic. It's almost like this could have been like a dragon of some sorts, just taking off the legs and converting it to an underwater character with the claw placement there, so I'd say this is pretty unique and pretty good. And outside, looking at the silhouette, I do actually appreciate the use of these Technic pieces, which really don't do much other than just fill the gap and make it seem a lot more solid in between. Overall, all pretty good things, neat parts usages, and feels very solid as a model. Outside of these falling off, I'm not really worried that anything else is going to break off of this. It's just that it's a little bit difficult to pose, especially on land. But now I guess we can zoom out from this model and take a look at how this compares to representative samples, where I'll be bringing along some Matoran as well as some other Rahi to compare it against.
Alright, so zooming out over here, I've brought over quite a few representative samples of different Rahi living in the universe, specifically from the official Bionicle Master Builder set all the way back from 2001. We've got like the Husi, the Hoi or Shore Turtle as it's called now, and a little Ussel Crab just to compare as to different Rahi building techniques. I've also brought a partially completed Takia Shark from that same set. I'm still waiting on some parts for it, which is why it has not been fully finished, but it is said in the Bionicle Wiki Biosector 01 that this Proto Drake often fed on Takia sharks, which made Ga-Metru, like Vizsla here, very happy because Takia sharks are a bit of a menace. So maybe you can imagine that this is just one that a big bite has been taken out of the backside. Can I imagine this eating this? Oh, potentially. It is quite large, so I can easily see it ripping it with the claws and whatnot. So going into this final point, how well does it fit in with the Bionicle universe? I'm gonna have to say it fits in pretty well. As is the case for many of these models, it does a pretty good blend of integrating Bionicle specific pieces like say the Rakshi foot or the Borak ribcage, as well as just pure Technic pieces like the fins on the back here. Just like say the Ussel Crab, which featured Bionicle specific claws here as feet, and then some specific Technic pieces as pincers, this one has very similar building techniques where you've got the mix of Bionicle and Technic. So to that end, I think it fits in reasonably well. There are a few things that make it a little bit strange to me just because there's a lot of Technic around here. There's some inexplicably placed Technic beams that I'm not really sure why those are here. They don't really serve a purpose, so that detracts a little bit from the aesthetics. And overall, can I imagine this emerging from the water of Matanui or Metru Nui? I think the answer is yes. It does scale pretty well next to a Ga-Metru. I can even imagine them maybe trying to ride one of these like so. You can even try to sit a Ga-Metru on the front. Now that would be an interesting concept, and it actually does scale pretty well to have a Matoran of Metru Nui be riding on the back. So I'm going to give fitting in the universe a 9 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close, and it's about as close as you can get with a Rahi build like this. But then moving aside the representative samples here, let's take a look at the Proto Drake as a main build and start to summarize how I feel on all 4 points of the review. So starting off, we have Posability. So Poseability, I think I really need to keep in mind that this is not a set that's designed to work well on a shelf. It's not a set designed to stand up on 2 legs. It's a set that's designed to be imagined as gliding through the water. And to that end, I'm going to give it a little bit of leeway here, because obviously, can this pose well? I mean, the answer is no. You can't even angle the flippers to have it pointed up because the weight of the ball sockets just isn't strong enough. The flippers, for one, just keep falling out, so there's that. And maybe you can try to get it, if you really try to balance the tail outwards or something like that, you can try to force it into an upright pose, but it's not really going to work out all too well unless you do something really crazy. And at that point, it doesn't even look like it's in a natural position anymore. It just looks like you have been forcing it to make it stand up. Kind of like this. I mean, this is probably the best I can do, which honestly isn't too bad. Almost looks more like a walrus in this shape, to be honest. But I think that it's pretty hard to get it into a good pose, especially with that inexplicably placed Rakshi spine on the bottom. So with that in mind, I do have to say, of course, it is a creature meant for underwater. And if I were to, say, bring this underwater or even hang it from a string to make it seem like it's gliding through the water, then you can get it into pretty good poses. You can see here the back flipper, it actually can articulate fully like it's swimming through the ocean like this, like a flipper motion like so. The flippers on the sides here can obviously articulate relatively well and make it look very streamlined like it's gliding through the water. So with that in mind, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 on Posability, mostly because on a shelf you can't really do anything with it, but it's not really designed to be fitting well on the shelf. It's designed to be played with and imagine that you're playing with it underwater. So to that end, I think I'm going to give it that 7 out of 10. It probably would be a little bit lower if it was like a land creature that couldn't stand up, but since it's a water creature that really can't stand up on land unless you really force it to, it's not really that bad. Now, in terms of building techniques, the biggest flaw with this model, as you saw many times in the video, is that these flippers will just constantly fall out. I'd actually recommend using the newer type of ball joint with the through axle hole for the connections here. You don't actually need it, and it didn't even exist when this model was built, but that piece generally is known to have a lot better friction than the original ball joint piece, so I'd actually kind of highly recommend you would just swap out that piece there. Your flippers will probably stay on a lot better if you decide to build this yourself and use the cross axle through hole piece, which was introduced first in 2006. But as for the rest of the building techniques, I honestly cannot complain. I love the way that the Technic beams are angled here, and the parts usages here to actually evoke that sort of plus size or that sort of plus grid type flipper type thing. We even have a really nice parts usages of the Ga-Lock flipper pieces to fill out the bulk of the arms here, and the only thing that's very questionable to me is the inclusion of the Rakshi spine, and obviously the head is a little bit simple but does its job. The Rakshi staff there does honestly kind of bug me. I still don't know what it was there for. I also don't know why this Technic beam was here. All sorts of kind of strange decisions that offset some of the good, but definitely the good outweighs the bad, so I'm going to give building techniques a 6 out of 10. Nothing too crazy other than the arrangement of these beams here, but there are a few things that kind of detract a little bit from it, and while the flippers are done in a manner such that they seem very solid and filled out, they are kind of offset by a very simple head and very inexplicable parts choices for the bottom pieces here. Then we can move on to the third point, which is aesthetics. And I think that aesthetically this looks pretty good. I mean, if you looked at it on a silhouette angle with the wings completely spread out, it does very realistically look like an underwater creature. Obviously, the aesthetics is bolstered by having these pieces right here mirror the angles of the Technic beams here, and the use of the Toa Nuva leg pieces, while simple, actually does give it a very streamlined and organic shape. So I'm definitely going to give it the benefit there when it comes to aesthetics. However, there are, again, a few little things. There's that dang Rakshi staff that's sticking out of the bottom that doesn't make too much sense to me. And I probably would have liked to see maybe a more pronounced flipper on the back here as a very aquatic or mythical-like creature. I feel like having a larger flipper in the back potentially would have been something that would have been really cool to include here. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it, so aesthetics is going to get an 8 out of 10. Again, not perfect. There's a few things that aren't right with it, but for the most part, it's pretty good in my eyes and a lot better than many of the other Rahi. And so with that about sums up this review. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know down in the comments below, what do you think of the Proto Drake model? Do you plan to build this one yourself? And if so, if you do have it built, what do you think of it? And how hopefully that ball joint pieces being very loose here, that issue has been resolved if you're using the cross axle one. Also, let me know down in the comments if there is a Bionicle model that you want to see reviewed next. I have a ton of these pre-recorded in the backlog, releasing every single week, so be sure to tune in to DuckBricks every Monday, where I'll be releasing a brand new Bionicle Fanon review, unless otherwise noted. Thank you again so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned to DuckBricks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks, and bye-bye for now.